My goodness. Moving over to the wide receiver spot. The top start this week is Tyler Lockett playing against the Cowboys. I love this matchup. I think it's going to be high scoring all the way. Dallas giving up the 7th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. I think Tyler Lockett is a great start this week.
Love is so evil, love is Saturday. It just consumes you until you can't believe. Haunted by memories, they're always killing me. Please spare me from my misery. Till it's ready to...
It's a little bit rough.
key. What have we been told? Easy to unfold. Future might seem every but we getting close. Will you follow me when the sky starts to change? Yeah, we won't be afraid. We'll never be the same again. Will you follow me? We won't leave it to chance. We can't wait ever back. We'll never be the same again. Will you follow me when the sky starts to change? Yeah, we won't be afraid. We'll never be the same again. Will you follow me when the sky starts to change? Yeah, we won't be afraid. We'll never be the same again. Will you follow me? We won't leave it to chance. We can't wait ever back. We'll never be the same
You're streaming with the Fantasy Follow. Welcome to TFF Live, and today the NFL is feeling the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. 2 games already postponed today, with the possibility of more to come. It's been a difficult couple of days, and I'm sure that the NFL did not expect a smooth ride. But let's start off the show by saying, first and foremost, football is a game. Fantasy football is a game. The health and well-being of all of those affected is most important. It was Tennessee that had the first issues. They've had 2 more positive test results today, bringing their total to 18 Tennessee Titans players and staff. Last week they played Minnesota, but so far the Vikings have not shown signs of transmission from that game. So their game will go on as scheduled today. Yesterday, the New England Patriots found out that Cam Newton tested positive for COVID-19. So he will be out for a while, and their game was immediately pushed back. In addition, Kansas City practice team member, quarterback Jordan Ta'amu, also found out he was positive from Friday's round of tests. So New England was set to play Kansas City. Their game has been postponed. Not sure yet when that will be, possibly tomorrow, possibly Tuesday, depending upon whether or not more positive tests come back. Both teams were instructed to leave their facilities. There was no travel to the games. The good news is that New England, as of yet, has not seen more positive results. Yet to hear about Kansas City. But that does mean the game has a chance to happen. But we will have to wait and see. They have not scheduled anything yet. So let's show you the list of players that are affected through these games as we transition to the fantasy impact. This is a fantasy show, and so we do need to let you know about this. So that first game, Pittsburgh and Tennessee, was scheduled to play today, rescheduled for Week 7. These are the players that could possibly be in your roster that will not be playing today. So in case you need to check those lineups, if you haven't checked them yet, be sure and take a look. A lot of very fantasy relevant players on those 2 teams. Derrick Henry, a first-round pick. James Conner, one of the top rounds picks. A lot of players who have been very active this season in that game. In addition, this is the game that may or may not take place in Week 4, Kansas City and New England. Also, obviously, a lot of important players there. Patrick Mahomes, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Tyreek Hill, Julian Edelman on the other side, Travis Kelce. So many players that are in play there. It's hard to know with this game possibly taking place or not. Obviously, you want to play your top guys if you have them, but hard to say whether or not they're going to play. So be prepared with a backup plan. Do what you can today to figure out your lineups. Obviously, it's a tough spot, but once again, more importantly, like I said, it's the health and well-being of all those people affected is certainly of the utmost importance here. We will transition it back to fantasy football. Let's let you know what we got for you on today's show. We'll take a look back at last week's action, get you some player updates from around the league. The active and inactive lists are out for the 1 p.m. game. We'll take a look at those, let you know who's in your lineup and who is not. Got some Twitter questions for you and starts and sits for Week 4. The live chat is open. Get in the conversation. Leave us your lineup questions there. We will answer whatever we can throughout the rest of the show. And if you're watching on replay, please leave your comments below. But let's get it started. We're going to start it off today with a look at some hot start quarterbacks.
Russ has just been so sharp and able to maintain his poise throughout with some rush today. This is a good rushing crew, and he found his receivers. He made some plays, made some great throws, and the receivers came through.
Well, that was Seattle head coach Pete Carroll after last Sunday's big win over the Dallas Cowboys, talking about his quarterback, Russell Wilson, who is off to a record start in 2020. 14 touchdowns through 3 games, the most in NFL history. 5 in the last 2 games, only the 5th player in history to throw for 5 touchdowns in back-to-back games. Now, Carroll and Wilson himself both talked about what was going so well at the start of this year with the Seahawks.
He's a great player. He's a great player. He's got extremely qualified guys catching the ball. Greg had some big plays, and DK had huge plays, 100 and something yards today. And Tyler, he's just got really good football players to work with, and he trusts them. He believes in them. He knows the system. He's taking advantage of, a whole array of things that we're doing, all different kinds of styles of throws and movements and all that. He's just on it. This is just you're watching a great football player do what he does best, and I'm just really excited about what happens next time we go out.
Yeah, I don't want to compare myself or anything. I don't know what else everybody else, how they think or whatever, but I know how I've thought for the past 10, 11 years of my life, just being, just believing in it, speaking great things, speaking great language, having adversity tolerance, being able to remain neutral in the midst of it all. And just, I've been through highs, I've been through lows, I've been through it all. And there's nothing really that can get to me, to be honest with you. And so for me, it's just, stay in the moment, stay right here in this play, execute this one, have great fundamentals, just be clutch when you need to be clutch, go make the play. And, and it's not on me, it's everybody. It's this group that we have, and guys showed up in a tremendous way tonight.
So off to nearly as big a start in Buffalo is Bills' third-year quarterback, Josh Allen. The stats for Allen: 1,038 passing yards, 10 touchdowns through the air, another 2 on the ground. According to the Bills, Allen is the only player to ever pass for over 1,000 yards with 10 touchdowns passing and 2 on the ground through the first 3 weeks of the season. Now, Buffalo coach Sean McDermott and Allen, they talked about the growth in Allen's game.
Tremendous amount of growth, and you learn through experiences, and we as a team have learned through shared experiences. And we've got 20 seconds or so on the clock yesterday. We're inside the 10-yard line, 5-yard line there, and there was absolutely no panic on the headset from our players on the sideline, from our players on the field. Just a lot of calm, and whether it's Josh in this case or any other player or staff member, just like we've been there a number of times before, and that's awesome.
one, the patience that the coaching staff has had with me, the things that we've worked on in the offseason, a la Jordan Palmer and Coach Dorsey and Shea and Dable. And, I really think that diving into the playbook as much as we did, I really feel like I know, answers, to the question. I wouldn't say all the time, but I feel like I got a good grasp of what our offense is doing. I think the better I play, the more I know, the more comfortable I feel, and it's just kind of this cycle. So I got to stay on top of it, understand what the defense is doing, understand that, it's not really about what they do, it's about how we react to what they do. So I think that's kind of where we've progressed in that area, and we're going to have to keep progressing as teams start watching film and finding new ways to try to slow us down, and whatever the case may be, we got to be prepared for every situation.
Well, no surprise that Wilson and Allen head up this list, the top fantasy scorers at the quarterback position after 3 games. Wilson at 34.33, Allen at 31.64 per game. But take a look at this top 5. These are some amazing numbers. Now, according to Pro Football Reference, the best season-long average is 27.71 fantasy points, and that was by Lamar Jackson last season. So if you look at this top 5, you have got a bunch of guys who are on record pace early on. And taking a look back at last week, let's take a look at the top scorers at each position, starting with the quarterbacks. It was Patrick Mahomes with 40 fantasy points last week against Baltimore, 385 yards, 4 touchdowns. He also added 26 yards on the ground and a touchdown there as well. It was Russell Wilson, 36.80 fantasy points in the win over Dallas. That was 315 yards with 5 touchdowns, adding 22 on the ground. Josh Allen, 32.24 in the win over the LA Rams, 311 yards through the air with 4 touchdowns, also adding a touchdown on the ground. Dak Prescott in a loss, 29.48 fantasy points against Seattle, 472 yards, taking him to a league-leading 1,188 yards after 3 games. He had 3 touchdowns, also added 26 yards on the ground. And Jared Goff in a loss, 28.24 fantasy points against Buffalo. And that was 321 yards passing with 2 touchdowns, also adding a touchdown on the ground. At the wide receiver spot, it was Tyler Lockett from the Seahawks, 37.00 fantasy points against Dallas, 100 yards, 9 catches, and 3 touchdowns. Rookie Justin Jefferson from the Vikings in a loss to Tennessee, 175 yards through the air. That led the league, 7 catches, 1 touchdown for 30.50 fantasy points. Keenan Allen in a loss versus Carolina, 30.20 fantasy points. That was 132 yards, a big 13 catches, and a touchdown. And Allen Robinson from Chicago in their comeback win against the Falcons, 28.30 fantasy points, 123 yards through the air, 10 catches, and 1 touchdown. And Cedric Wilson, of course, of all the receivers in Dallas, Cedric Wilson makes the list. 27.70 fantasy points in the loss to Seattle, 107 yards, 5 catches, and 2 touchdowns. Taking a look at the running back spot, where it was a tremendous day for Alvin Kamara in a loss to Green Bay, 44.70 fantasy points. That was on 58 yards on the ground with no touchdowns, but a big 139 yards receiving, 13 catches, and 2 touchdowns. Certainly taking up a lot of load there without Michael Thomas. Rex Burkhead in second versus Las Vegas, 34.80 fantasy points. That was 49 yards rushing with 2 touchdowns, another 49 pass catching, 7 catches, and a touchdown there as well. Austin Eckler in third for the Chargers against Carolina, 31.30 fantasy points. That was 59 yards rushing with a touchdown there. Another 84 through the air with a big 11 catches. James Robinson in the Thursday night game versus Miami, 30.90 fantasy points. That was 46 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns, another 83 catching, 6 catches. And then Derrick Henry in 5th for the Titans against the Vikings, 27.00 fantasy points, 119 yards on the ground with 2 touchdowns, throwing in another 11 yards of receiving. And at the tight end spot, it was Jimmy Graham, number 1 for the Bears, playing against the Falcons, 24.00 fantasy points. That was 60 yards on 6 catches with 2 touchdowns. Tyler Kroft for the Bills in the win over the Rams, 18.40 fantasy points. That was 24 yards, 4 catches, 2 touchdowns. Eric Ebron for the Steelers in their win over Houston, 16.20 fantasy points, 52 yards on 5 catches, and 1 touchdown. Robert Tonyan. Who? Robert Tonyan for the Packers. No Devontae Adams. They threw the ball around a little bit. In the win over the Saints, 16.00 fantasy points. That was 50 yards on 5 catches, 1 touchdown. And Travis Kelce for the Chiefs against Baltimore, 14.70 fantasy points. That was 87 yards, 7 catches. Apparently, the key to victory for your teams is good games by the tight end, because all five of these guys, they all had wins last week. All right, let's get you some player updates from around the league. And today we will start out in Chicago.
Obviously, I know everyone's going to have questions with the quarterbacks. You know, we got together last night as coaches, and we talked about some stuff about where we were. Got up this morning and went through the tape, and at the end of it, we decided that we're going to start Nick Foles as a starter against Indianapolis. So both quarterbacks are aware of that. I know it's, for us, it's never easy. When you go into these type of situations, I want to credit both of those guys in yesterday's situation for being really supportive of each other this whole time. Even as hard as that was for Mitch to be told that he's Nick's going to go in and play. Mitch was, to his credit, was just an awesome supporter of Nick the rest of that game, and he flat out told Nick, "I'm going to have your back just like you've had mine from the start." I think that speaks to who he is, as well, with him speaking to all you guys after the game, which he doesn't have to do, and he did it. And I think that speaks volumes to Mitch and who he is as a person. So, we're still going to support each other as we move forward here. We have a healthy quarterback room, and we're just looking forward to prepping here against the Colts.
Hey, Matt, have you seen enough from Devonte this week for him to be part of the game plan? I feel like he's got a good chance to go.
Yeah, we got about 53 hours before kickoff, so, we'll get up to that time, and then we'll make a decision. But, we'll see.
How did Chris Carson do for the week?
He did fine. We've got him listed as questionable. He was on the ground, after a play last week, and so we got to make sure that he's okay. But he had a good, solid week, and we'll go all the way to game time to make sure that he feels really confident and all. But he looked good, and he took plays yesterday and today.
It's hard for me to speculate on a lot of these injuries.
Can you speculate on Kareem Hunt at all, or is it just a mystery at this point?
I'd say we'll know more each and every day. He won't be out there at practice today, but we'll know more as the week goes on.
How big of a lift is it to the offense to have DJ Chark available Sunday?
Oh, I think it's, obviously it's a big lift, to get someone like DJ, not only of what he can do on the field, but, there's a lot of things that he does on the sideline, his leadership, and just the way, he pushes everyone around them and tries to make everyone around them better. So, again, anytime you got players like that coming back, it's going to help your football team.
All right, we got the actives and inactives coming up next. But first, we want to remind you it's the TFF Live Sunday pregame show, and we are here every Sunday at 12 noon Eastern time, taking you right up until game time, getting you ready for each and every week's fantasy matchups. All right, let's get you going with actives and inactives for today's 1 p.m. games. The lists are out. We'll let you know who's in, who's out, who you need to get out of your lineups. Starting Jacksonville at Cincinnati. A couple of actives for Jacksonville, DJ Chark. Joe Mixon active for Cincinnati. D.D. Westbrook has been out all season, I think, for Jacksonville, and John Ross on the inactive side for Cincinnati. Should be an interesting game here. Cincinnati been very prone to the run. James Robinson is a nice target today to see what he does. Next game is Cleveland and Dallas. Couple of players we were concerned about. Kareem Hunt. Odell Beckham was not listed as questionable, but he was on the injury report. It was more so Hunt. But Hunt has not been ruled out for this game. Should be a high-scoring one. Definitely want to see what happens in this game. New Orleans at Detroit. This was actually a game that was a little bit in question, as New Orleans actually had a false positive result come back overnight. They had already traveled to Detroit for the game, and this was very much in question. They were able to actually double-check the result and have decided they are going ahead with this game. However, not playing in this game, again, Michael Thomas, the star receiver, tough for everybody's fantasy lineup who drafted him high. And also Jared Cook, the tight end, is out for this game. So this is going to be an interesting one. New Orleans also very banged up on the defensive side. So that makes your Detroit players valuable in today's fantasy lineups. Kenny Golladay, Marvin Jones, Adrian Peterson, Matthew Stafford. I think definitely on the passing side for sure. I don't know what Peterson will do, but good opportunities there. Get ready for the points to fly. It's another Seattle game. DK Metcalf is active. Tyler Lockett is active. And the biggest concern was Chris Carson, who was injured last week. He is active for this game, and they must feel confident in Carson because Carlos Hyde was questionable, and they are not pushing it with Hyde. Hyde is inactive for this game, so for anybody that was worried about playing Carson, it looks like he is good to go in this one. We got the Chargers at Tampa Bay. A lot of names on this list. Tyrod Taylor inactive. It'll be Justin Herbert again. Mike Williams is out. On the Tampa Bay side, Leonard Fournette out. Injured last week. Chris Godwin, hamstring, out. Scotty Miller is active. That'll be good for their receiver core, but we expect a big Mike Evans day in this game. He had a big game when Godwin was out earlier this season. So feel happy if you have Mike Williams on your roster. This could be an interesting game. We got Baltimore at Washington. Terry McLaurin was questionable during the week. He is active today, as is Dontrell Inman, who played well last week for Washington. Steven Sims still inactive, and Bryce Love the same. Nothing to speak of on the Baltimore side whatsoever. Arizona and Carolina. Few players that were of a concern. DeAndre Hopkins, the prime target for Kyler Murray. He is in. Christian Kirk is in. Of course, we know for Carolina, there's no Christian McCaffrey. There'll be Mike Davis in that backfield. And Curtis Samuel is in for the Panthers. Minnesota playing at Houston. Active today, he's been out for a couple of weeks, is Duke Johnson. We'll see how much he steals in the backfield from David Johnson. And Will Fuller is active. Although with Will Fuller, you really never know what's going to happen. That could change a minute into the game, or he could put up 200 fantasy points. It's usually one or the other. No Kiki Kuti for Houston. No Tajay Sharp for Minnesota. All right, taking a look at some of the later games to pay attention to. The Giants and the Rams. Cam Akers is out. Has not been with the team for a while. Nothing else to speak of there. .425 game, Indianapolis and Chicago. This game was originally scheduled to be a 1 p.m. game. It was pushed back. The only name on the list that is out there, Michael Pittman, the receiver. Nobody else listed as questionable. I think this is going to be a low-scoring, not good for fantasy game on both sides. These are two stingy defenses this year. Chicago has been good for a few years. Probably not quite as good as they were. But Indianapolis a little bit surprising this year. I don't think there's going to be a lot of points scored in this game. .425 game, Buffalo at Las Vegas. Questionable again, Zach Moss did not play last week for the Bills. For the Raiders, Henry Ruggs is listed as doubtful, and Brian Edwards is out. Full disclosure, I am Bills Mafia all the way. And much as I don't want to say it, I do not have a good feeling about this game for the Bills. I think this is going to be a Raiders win. I hope that doesn't happen, but I just see it going that way. I think that the Bills have been a little bit vulnerable to the run. I think that Las Vegas will go heavy on Josh Jacobs, and I think that will open up the play action. And Darren Waller, the Bills have been a little bit more stingy to the receivers than they have to the tight end. I think Darren Waller is the main guy there, and he is going to have a nice game today. We got a comment here from Justin Hart. What's up, Justin? Thanks for commenting. Thanks for watching the show. Glad you're here. If you got any lineup questions, feel free to add those as well. But he says, what's up, Joe C? When is Buffalo D going to stop giving up a ton of points? Well, I don't know if today is that day. I really don't have a good feeling about this game. Let's hope it's different, but West Coast trip for the Bills. Travel is a little different this year. You never know what's going to happen, but I am a little bit worried. So it's a 4:25 game. At least we can all watch our fantasy teams during the first round of matchups when the bulk of the games are on, and then watch the Bills for the next game. So that's always good. Don't forget, the live chat is open. Get in the conversation. If you've got any lineup questions, please feel free to ask. We'll get to those later on in the show. We'll pile them up and run right through them. Feel free, if you're watching on replay, please leave us your comments about what you think about the action that you saw in Week 4. Couple more games to go here still. Oh, boy. Who is left in this game? This is the NBC game tonight, 8:20, Philadelphia and San Francisco. Holy cow, everybody's out. Questionable is not even a concern. It's doubtful for J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. This game, Desean Jackson out. Alshon Jeffrey not back yet. Dallas Goedert out. So the Eagles are just banged up. And for the 49ers, no Jimmy Garoppolo. No Raheem Mostert. That means probably another nice game for the two 49ers running backs, and that's Jerick McKinnon and also Jeff Wilson. So we'll see what happens there. That'll be a little bit of an interesting watch. And of course, we got the Monday night game. Atlanta and Green Bay. This is a tricky situation. All reports are that Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley are expected to play. Devontae Adams, I do believe, was last said that he's going to try to work his way into the lineup, but these are a lot of players that are top names that you have to be worried about. Awful tough to come up with backup plans. Last week, the backup plan was Allen Lazard for Green Bay, and he's not there this week. So this is a little bit of a tough spot for fantasy players. Probably a nice high-scoring matchup for whoever does play. So we'll have to see what happens there. All right, we want to tell you once again, every Sunday we're here with the pregame show, starting at noon and taking you right up until game time. Join us every Sunday. Ask us your lineup questions. Get in the conversation. And here is where you can find the Fantasy Follow. We thank you for watching today on YouTube. Please subscribe, like, share, comment. We are a brand new channel, and we have a goal of 100 new subscribers by week 7. So please help us reach our goal. Click that subscribe button. Turn on your notifications so you can be alerted whenever there's new videos or a live show on Sunday on the way. We're glad to have you with us. Check us out on Twitter at The Fantasy Follow, and fantasy is spelled FNTSY. And don't forget, you can submit your lineup questions during the week on Twitter using the hashtag AskTFFLive, and we will answer your Twitter questions on the show. You can even send us Twitter questions by video, and we can air your video on the show. On Facebook /The Fantasy Follow, and our website, thefantasyfollow.com. All right, let's check out Twitter, see if we got some questions to answer from during the week this week. This question from Bill Kennicott. Well, first of all, thank you, Bill, for being a regular viewer. Appreciate your question. Bill asks, at the Fantasy Follow, do you trust Julio to be ready by Monday, or should I keep Scary Terry and or James Robinson in my lineup? Well, Bill, Julio is expected to be ready. He is still questionable, as is Calvin Ridley, so you never really know what's going to happen. And Scary Terry McLaurin, also questionable. Let's talk for a minute about James Robinson here. He's got a great matchup against Cincinnati. He has had a great year. He's the RB5 overall right now. I'm curious as to what the rest of your lineup looks like here if you're choosing between Robinson and Julio. It sounds like for your flex, James Robinson has had a great year, and he is a player to keep near your lineup mostly every week at this point. He is the guy in Jacksonville. If you have Julio, you're probably not going to sit him if he's available to play. It's difficult with a Monday matchup, but I would keep an eye on Robinson, and he is very worthwhile at this point in fantasy football. We will transition it back to fantasy football. Let's let you know what we got for you on today's show. We'll take a look back at last week's action. And thank you, Bill, for the Twitter question. We love to get the questions on Twitter. If you want to send us your question during the week, tweet us at the Fantasy Follow, and that's fantasy spelled FNTSY, and send us your question using the hashtag AskTFFLive. We'll use those questions on the show next week. Well, that's the magic of live streaming, everybody. That was a nice misclick there. So he took us back to the earlier part of the show, but we're back live with you now. So we'll try not to hit those wrong buttons anymore. All right, let's get you going with starts and sits for week 4, and we will start out at the quarterback spot. The top start is Aaron Rodgers playing the Atlanta Falcons. This is the Monday night game. The Falcons giving up the most fantasy points to the quarterback position. Rodgers has had a very nice season so far. He is averaging 24.59 fantasy points. He has thrown 9 touchdowns. That is tied for third in the league. Now, Atlanta has given up 30 or more fantasy points to the quarterback each game they've played this year, including 30.84 combined last week to Mitchell Trubisky and Nick Foles. Aaron Rodgers, the top start. Taking a look at the rest of the top 5. Number 2, Desean Watson. This should be a nice breakout game for Watson and Houston. Minnesota has allowed 300-plus yards passing in 2 of 3 games, and they have allowed the 3rd most passing yards in the league. And probably the best news for Watson and Houston is they're not playing Kansas City, they're not playing Baltimore, they're not playing Pittsburgh. It's time for Desean Watson to show himself. Number 3, it's Joe Burl from the Cincinnati Bengals playing the Jacksonville Jaguars. Jacksonville giving up the 6th most fantasy points to the quarterback position. Now, Burrow is averaging over 47 pass attempts this season, and he's had 300 or more passing yards each of the last 2 weeks and 20 or more fantasy points the last 2. So I think this is a nice spot for Joe Burrow. Number 4, Matthew Stafford for the Detroit Lions playing the Saints. The Saints are banged up on defense. They are allowing the 5th most fantasy points to the quarterback spot. And they are also allowing the 3rd most passing yards per game. Stafford has been consistent but hasn't had that big game yet. And he's got Kenny Golladay back in the lineup this week. And number 5, Baker Mayfield for the Cleveland Browns playing the Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to the quarterback spot. And also the 5th most passing yards allowed. Basically against Dallas, fire everybody up. Now, Baker hasn't been great this year, but this is a nice week for him to get it going. The top quarterback sit is Carson Wentz, playing in the night game tonight at San Francisco, who are allowing the 6th fewest fantasy points to the quarterback spot. They have allowed under 12 fantasy points the last 2 weeks in a row. Wentz, 2 interceptions each game. The Eagles are completely banged up. No Jalen Reagor, no Dallas Goedert, not likely to have Desean Jackson, not likely to have Alshon Jeffrey. This is a very tough spot for Wentz. He is the top sit. The rest of the top 5. Number 2, Phillip Rivers from the Colts, playing at Chicago. The Bears allowing the 2nd fewest fantasy points to the quarterback spot. Now, last week they held Matt Ryan, who is having a nice year, to 12.42 fantasy points. Last year, Rivers only had 11.04 fantasy points versus the Bears and 200 yards playing for the Chargers. So Phillip is number 2 on the list this week. Number 3 is Kirk Cousins for the Vikings, playing the Texans. Houston allowing the 13th fewest fantasy points to the quarterback spot. Now, the 3 quarterbacks they faced this year, Mahomes, Jackson, Roethlisberger, only allowing 20 points once. Cousins, 5 interceptions in the last 2 games. He finds his way to your bench this week. Number 4, Nick Foles for the Bears versus the Colts. Indianapolis giving up the fewest fantasy points to the quarterback spot. Now, it's nice that Foles was able to get in there and get the start, but this is not a good week for him. Last week, Sam Darnold, 9.72 fantasy points versus Indianapolis. In week 2, Kirk Cousins, 1.52 fantasy points versus them. Each of them with 3 interceptions in those games. Not a good week for Nick Foles. And number 5, Teddy Bridgewater for Carolina versus Arizona. Arizona only 26th against the quarterback for fantasy points. Bridgewater averaging 12.64 fantasy points the last 2 weeks. I don't hate Bridgewater as a starter for the rest of the year, but I just think Arizona's defense has improved since last season, and that makes this a tough start. Moving over to the wide receiver spot, the top start is Odell Beckham Jr. for the Cleveland Browns, playing the Dallas Cowboys. Dallas giving up the 2nd most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Now, Beckham, he has certainly been up and down in Cleveland, but the Cowboys allowed 29.90 points to Calvin Ridley in week 2 and 37.0 to Tyler Lockett in week 3. They have allowed 7 touchdowns to wide receivers this year. I think this is a great week for a big game from Odell Beckham. The rest of the top 5. Number 2, Allen Lazard. Allen Lazard is out for quite some time, so he will not be bringing you very many fantasy points this week. Do not play him. Number 3, Will Fuller for the Houston Texans versus the Minnesota Vikings. Minnesota giving up the 4th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. They have also allowed the 3rd most passing yards this year. Last week at Pittsburgh, Fuller had 13.4 fantasy points. And as you know, if you start Will Fuller, there is always a risk that he is out of the game shortly after the start. I think this is a good enough matchup to make it worthwhile to take that shot with Will Fuller. Number 4, Michael Gallup for the Dallas Cowboys versus the Cleveland Browns. Cleveland allowing the 6th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Now, Gallup had a nice game last week. Dallas certainly tried to get him more involved in the offense with 9 targets, 6 catches, 138 yards, and a touchdown. Now, Cleveland in week 1 allowed 101 yards to Marquis Brown, and he is a big play player, and I think that Gallup fits that mold. That's why out of all the Cowboys receivers, obviously you're starting Amari Cooper, but I've selected Michael Gallup to be on this list because I think Cleveland will give up the big play to him. And number 5, Tyler Boyd for the Cincinnati Bengals versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, Jacksonville is giving up the 13th fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. However, the sheer volume of passing in that offense for Cincinnati makes Boyd a good start most any week at this point. Cincinnati is throwing the ball everywhere. 13 targets for Boyd last week, 10 catches, 125 yards, 22.50 fantasy points. I think Boyd will return another nice week today. The top sit is Marquis Hollywood Brown for the Baltimore Ravens, playing against Washington. Washington allowing the 6th fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver spot, only allowing one wide receiver over 10 this year, and they are allowing the 5th fewest passing yards in the league. Now, Brown has had 6 targets each game, but he's seen his production go down each week. 15 points the first, 10 the second, and 3 the third. I have him as the top sit this week. And here's the rest of the top 5. Adam Thielen for the Minnesota Vikings, playing at the Texans. The Texans are 19th to the wide receiver fantasy spot. Only one wide receiver over 46 yards this year, and the 3rd fewest passing yards allowed this year. Thielen, just 6 catches and 60 yards combined in the last 2 weeks. I have him as the number 2 sit. Number 3, Anthony Miller for the Bears versus the Colts. Indianapolis allowing the 5th fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver spot, and no wide receiver over 15 fantasy points this year. They have allowed the fewest passing yards in the league. Now, Miller has had a touchdown in 2 of 3 games, and I do like Miller going forward this year now with Nick Foles and more consistent quarterback play, but this week I have him on the sit list. Number 4 is T.Y. Hilton for the Colts at the Bears. Chicago allowing the 11th fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Now, Hilton has really struggled to find that connection with Phillip Rivers this year, and I think that continues this week. I have him as a sit. And number 5 is Desean Jackson from the Eagles at the 49ers. San Francisco just 23rd to the wide receiver fantasy spot. 2nd fewest pass yards allowed in the league. Jackson nursing a hamstring issue as well. If he does play, he's only had 1 game over 10 fantasy points, just 2 catches in 2 of 3 games. He is number 5 on the sit list this week. And of course, as I look back, Desean Jackson is on the outside of that game. So even more reason not to play him in your lineup this week. I don't think he's going to help you much. Moving over to the running back spot. The top starts and sits this week. The top start is David Johnson from the Houston Texans, playing the Minnesota Vikings, who are giving up the 8th most fantasy points to the running back spot. They are also allowing the 7th most rush yards in the league. Now, this is kind of the same deal with Desean Watson. You're not playing Kansas City, Baltimore, or Pittsburgh anymore. I really do like David Johnson this year. I think he's going to get a lot of workload there in Houston. I think in previous years, they have gotten decent production out of Carlos Hyde and Lamar Miller, and I think that David Johnson is still a much better back than both of them. They've had awful matchups to start the year. I think this is the week when David Johnson starts to turn it around. As a matter of fact, I have liked David Johnson as a potential trade early in the season if you could get him from another team that might be frustrated with him. I do think this is the start of good things to come in that Houston backfield. The rest of the top 5 starts. Kenyon Drake at number 2 for the Arizona Cardinals, playing the Panthers. Here's another running back that's gotten off to a little bit of a slow start based on where you drafted him. But the Panthers allowing the second most fantasy points to the running back spot. They've allowed 2 30-plus fantasy points players in 3 games, and they've given up 7 touchdowns to running backs. So this is a good week for Drake to get right. Number 3 is James Robinson. Are you listening, Bill Kennicott? James Robinson playing Cincinnati. The Bengals giving up the 5th most fantasy points to the running back spot and the 2nd most rushing yards in the league. Now, Miles Sanders had 95 yards against them last week. Robinson is the overall RB5 in the league. A lot of people might not realize that he is that high up this year. So, Bill Kennicott, if you're considering playing Robinson in your flex instead of Julio, if Derrick Henry was drafted as the 5th running back this year and he was currently the RB5, here's the question you have to ask yourself. Would you play him over Julio Jones? Because right now that's where James Robinson is, and he's playing a team that is leaking points to the running back spot. So you have got a tough decision ahead of you. Number 4, Mike Davis from the Panthers versus the Cardinals. Arizona giving up the 11th most fantasy points to the running back spot. Davis last week, 23.1 fantasy points against the Chargers, 8 catches and a touchdown. I think Davis has been a great pickup if you got him off the waiver wire. I think he's a very valuable player out of the backfield as a pass catcher as well. So he fills the slot nicely that Christian McCaffrey is out with injury for. Number 5. Well, by the way, this is if you watched our video during the week, when starts and sits are on the live show, these are the same starts and sits in the video. I don't change them. So if it goes good, then great. If it goes bad, then, I might just boo myself. But in this case, Melvin Gordon, the number 5 start, 25.80 points for the Broncos against the Jets. There's only so much patting myself on the back I can do for this. He's playing the Jets. I've been pretty mean to the Jets this year on this show, but so far they haven't shown much to deserve otherwise. So pretty much, anybody playing the Jets, any defense playing the Jets is probably a good one this year. The top running back sit is David Montgomery of the Bears playing the Colts. Indianapolis giving up the 6th fewest fantasy points to the running back spot and the 4th fewest rushing yards allowed in the league. Montgomery only had 7.4 fantasy points last week against the Falcons. This game is going to be low scoring on both sides. So I definitely don't expect a situation where you see a big Bears lead and Montgomery getting a lot of game script out of it. I think this is a low-scoring game. I think this is going to be a rough one to watch if you're watching it on the Sunday ticket. So steer away from David Montgomery. He's the top sit this week. The rest of the top 5, Myles Gaskin from the Dolphins versus the Seahawks. Seattle giving up the 5th fewest fantasy points to the running back spot. Most teams are throwing against Seattle. Last week, Ezekiel Elliott, only 34 rushing yards for Dallas. Now, Gaskin does lead the backfield in Miami now. I just don't like this matchup for him. At number 3 is Antonio Gibson for Washington versus Baltimore. Obviously, playing Baltimore is rough. The 4th fewest fantasy points to the running back spot. They've allowed only 1 rush touchdown this year. Washington's offense has struggled. Gibson has averaged 10.5 fantasy points. I think eventually he is going to turn into something this year, but I don't think it's going to happen this week. Number 4, Leonard Fournette. Again, this is the same list that came out during the week. Fournette is out, so please don't play him in your lineup. You're not going to get many points from him. And number 5, Devonte Freeman for the Giants against the Rams. 19 yards last year versus the Rams for Freeman when he was with Atlanta. Last week, he had just 5 rushes versus San Francisco. I don't think he is about to be the main guy in that Giants backfield right now. Even when he does get up to speed, perhaps things turn around if you picked him up off the waiver wire. But this week, he can stay on the bench. And we're about 5 minutes to game time, so we're going to speed through the tight ends here. We're going to give you the top tight end start, and that is T.J. Hockenson. T.J. Hockenson, 2 weeks in a row on this list. Last week, he was the top sit. So this is a worst to first, and that is because New Orleans is first in allowing fantasy points to the tight end spot. So this is going to be a nice week for T.J. Hockenson. He's averaging over 5 targets per game, only 1 touchdown so far. I believe that will change today. The rest of the top 5. Mark Andrews going to turn around today against the Washington FTs. Dalton Schultz against Cleveland. Cleveland 4th most fantasy points to the tight end spot. Schultz is going to get in there. Darren Waller, unfortunately, against the Bills is going to have a big game today. And at number 5, Zach Ertz against the 49ers. The 49ers giving up the 2nd fewest fantasy points to the tight end spot, but they are going to have to scheme Ertz into something today because they have practically nobody else to throw the ball to. So we will have to see some Zach Ertz, and I'll be happy because I have him in a couple of leagues. The top sit today is Tyler Higbee versus the Giants. New York giving up the 5th fewest points to the tight end spot. Higbee only had 2 targets last week against Buffalo. I think this is a decent week to keep him on the bench. And the rest of the top 5. Number 2, Hayden Hurst. Sadly, one of my favorite players this year, but against Green Bay, 24th to the tight end spot, so they are solidly in the bottom half. They allowed Jared Cook just 2 catches last week, although Cook was banged up. But Hurst only did have 3 targets last week, did have a touchdown, but still did not produce the big game that he could have. He's on the sit list along with Greg Olsen at Miami, Austin Hooper at Dallas, and Hunter Henry, another tight end that I like, but I don't like him this week. Keep him on your bench. All right, that's all the starts and sits. We got a couple of comments to go through. We only got a couple of minutes to game time. As usual, I hope I've got my lineup set because I didn't get a chance to check them this morning before the show. Sometime I'll do that, but not this week. We got a response here from Justin referring to the Buffalo D comment earlier. It says, sadly, I'm with you. I've dumped Buffalo D to start Houston's D. I don't think that's a bad play at all. I think Houston is not the vaunted defense that they once were, but playing against Kirk Cousins, who has turned it over quite a bit this year, I think that's a good start. And this one from, well, I hope I say this name right, Hanok Asefa. Should I start Odell or Adam Thielen this week? I do think that there is a little bit of potential with Thielen. I have him on the sit list because he's been underperforming. I definitely don't like him over Odell this week. Odell has a great opportunity. Now, granted, he has not been in Cleveland what a lot of people had hoped for, but I think this is a great week for Odell. I think this is a great week for Baker Mayfield. Just a really good situation. If you're playing the Cowboys, you're starting everybody. So between these two, I'm definitely picking Odell Beckham. And we got about 2 minutes to game time, so let's thank everybody for being here. Appreciate everybody watching the show. Feel free to join us every week leading up to the game. If you're watching on replay, please leave your comments below. Let us know what you thought of our picks. Let us know what we did well or what we got wrong. And let's see if we can get a little promo up here for you. Where are we at? Here we are. Every Sunday, 12 noon, taking you right up until game time, which is almost now. We get you ready for your fantasy matchups. Our chat is always open. You can ask us lineup questions. We go through all the information that we can bring you to get ready for each of your weekly fantasy days. And let's let you know where you can find us. If I can find that promo, here it is. The Fantasy Follow. We are a brand new YouTube channel, so please subscribe now. Thumbs up this video if you liked it. Comment below and share. And as we said before, we have set a goal of 100 new YouTube subscribers by week 7. So please help us to reach that goal as we continue to progress this show forward. Check us out on Twitter. Tweet us at The Fantasy Follow. That's fantasy spelled FNTSY. And don't forget, during the week, you can submit your lineup questions using the hashtag AskTFFLive, and we will answer your questions on the show. Facebook/The Fantasy Follow. The website, thefantasyfollow.com. We're ready for game time. Thank you for watching the show. As always, good luck in fantasy. We'll see you next week.